I'm Ethan Brooks. And 48 days before I quietly walked into a small electronics store and heard the new manager say, "Welcome back, sir." 3 security guards had marched me through those same front doors like I was a shoplifter. Funny how a building can look exactly the same while everything inside it changes, including the people who think they own it. If you told me that buying a laptop would end with police at my apartment, an internal military review, lawyers filling conference rooms, and one executive losing everything she'd spent 10 years building, I would have laughed and told you to get some sleep. But life has a strange way of reminding you that pride can be expensive, and assumptions are even more expensive. At the time, I was serving as a lieutenant colonel with the Army, stationed about 3 hours from where I'd grown up. My younger sister had just started college. My mom's old desktop computer had finally given up after nearly a decade, and I'd been putting away part of every paycheck for months because I wanted a reliable laptop that I could use for work after retirement and eventually pass along to her. It wasn't an emotional purchase. It was practical. 6 months of skipped restaurant meals, worn-out running shoes I refused to replace, and enough homemade coffee to keep my local cafe wondering if I'd moved away had finally added up to the money sitting inside an envelope in my backpack. I had the day off after finishing a week of field exercises. So instead of changing into civilian clothes, I drove straight from base. My uniform wasn't pressed perfectly anymore. There was still dust around my boots, and I probably looked more tired than professional. But I wasn't thinking about appearances. I was thinking about finally checking one thing off my list before flying home to surprise my family that weekend. Tech District Electronics had a reputation for knowledgeable staff, decent prices, and good warranties. I'd never been inside before, but the parking lot was packed, which usually felt like a good sign. Inside, families wandered between display tables while teenagers tested gaming keyboards and older couples argued over televisions. The place buzzed with ordinary Saturday energy, the kind that almost makes you forget everyone is carrying around their own invisible problems. I found the laptop I'd researched online, compared 2 different models, and flagged down a young employee who answered a couple of questions with genuine enthusiasm. He couldn't have been older than 22. "Nice kid." He smiled, said he'd grab a sealed unit from the back, then disappeared through a swinging door. I never saw him again that afternoon. Instead, another woman appeared, mid-40s, tailored navy blazer, company badge that read Melissa Crane, store manager. She didn't greet me. She didn't smile. She looked at me the way someone looks at a stain on a clean shirt, slowly from my boots to my face, pausing just long enough to make sure I noticed. "Can I help you?" she asked. It wasn't really a question. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "One of your associates is grabbing that laptop for me." She glanced toward the stockroom, then back at me. "Actually, I think we're going to ask you to leave." I blinked. "I'm sorry, you heard me." Her voice stayed calm, almost rehearsed. "We're refusing service today." I honestly thought she'd mistaken me for somebody else. "Is there a problem?" I asked. "Company policy allows us to refuse service whenever management believes it's appropriate." "Appropriate based on what?" She folded her arms. "I don't owe you an explanation." A few nearby shoppers slowed down just enough to pretend they weren't listening. I reached into my wallet, still convinced this was some strange misunderstanding. "Here's my military ID," I said. "I'm just buying a computer." She barely looked at it. "Put that away. I also have the money right here." I unzipped my backpack and showed the sealed envelope without even opening it. "I'm paying in full." Instead of calming the situation, her expression somehow hardened. "Security," she called over her shoulder. I actually laughed once because the whole thing felt ridiculous. "Ma'am, nobody needs security." 3 employees wearing black security shirts appeared within seconds. None of them looked particularly comfortable. One older guard quietly asked, "Sir, would you mind coming with us?" "Can somebody first tell me what I supposedly did?" Nobody answered. Melissa simply pointed toward the entrance as if I were furniture being moved across the room. People stopped shopping. Little boy tugged on his father's sleeve. 2 teenagers lifted their phones, probably hoping something dramatic would happen. I remember thinking how strange embarrassment feels. It isn't loud. It doesn't hit you all at once. It sort of crawls under your skin while your brain keeps insisting there must be a reasonable explanation. I walked outside because I wasn't about to create a scene in uniform. One guard quietly apologized under his breath before returning inside. Melissa remained just beyond the sliding doors, watching until I reached my truck. As I started the engine, I caught one last glimpse of her turning away with the satisfied look of someone convinced she protected her store from a dangerous customer. I drove away telling myself to let it go. I had no idea she wasn't finished with me yet, and by the time the sun went down, one phone call would turn an insulting afternoon into the beginning of the biggest legal fight of my life. The knock came just after 8 that evening. Not loud, not aggressive. Just 3 firm taps that somehow felt heavier than they should have. I opened my apartment door expecting maybe a neighbor or one of the guys from base. Instead, 2 city police officers stood there, both wearing the kind of careful expressions officers use when they don't quite know what they're walking into. "Lieutenant Colonel Ethan Brooks?" the older one asked. "Yes, sir. We need to ask you a few questions regarding an incident reported earlier today." For a second, I honestly thought they had the wrong address. Then I saw the incident number on the clipboard, and my stomach sank. "Does this have anything to do with Tech District Electronics?" The younger officer exchanged a quick glance with his partner. "It does. They stepped inside after I invited them in, looked around my apartment for less than 30 seconds, and immediately seemed confused. Military commendations hung neatly beside framed family photos. My boots were lined up by the door. My dining table was covered with paperwork from an upcoming logistics briefing. Nothing about the place matched whatever picture someone had apparently painted for them. The senior officer finally sighed and said, "Sir, according to the report we received, you threatened multiple employees after refusing to leave private property." I actually laughed before I realized he wasn't joking. "Threatened them? That's what's written here." He handed me the first page. The manager claimed I'd become verbally aggressive, clenched my fists, advanced toward employees, and forced her to fear for everyone's safety. Every sentence made my eyebrows climb a little higher. It wasn't just exaggerated. It was fiction. Complete fiction. "Officers," I said as calmly as I could. There were 30 people in that store. Security escorted me out because I refused to argue. I never raised my voice. They questioned me for nearly 3 hours, not because they believed I was guilty, but because procedure demanded they document every detail after a formal complaint. By the time they left, one of them quietly apologized. "Between us, something about this report doesn't feel right, but we'll let investigators sort it out." I appreciated his honesty, but it didn't undo the damage. My flight home departed 45 minutes before the interview finally ended. I promised my mother I'd surprise her for her birthday. Instead, I spent that evening sending an apology text while staring at a packed suitcase sitting untouched beside my couch. That hurt more than I expected. The next morning wasn't any easier. Around 9, my commanding officer called me into his office. Colonel Harris had been in the Army longer than I'd been shaving. He wasn't angry. If anything, he looked disappointed that bureaucracy had landed on both our desks. "Ethan," he began, folding his hands together, "I know your record. 21 years, without so much as a parking complaint. But when civilian law enforcement files a report involving an officer, regulations require a review." I finished for him. He nodded. "Exactly. It wasn't a punishment. It wasn't even an accusation. It was simply another investigation added to my life because someone had decided a lie was easier than admitting she'd abused her authority." Walking out of his office, I realized something that stayed with me for weeks. Reputation takes decades to build and about 30 seconds to place under suspicion. Most people never hear the final outcome. They only remember the accusation. That thought bothered me far more than missing a laptop sale. Friends on base started asking quiet questions. "Everything okay? Heard something happened downtown." Nobody treated me differently, but I could see curiosity replacing certainty, and that alone was exhausting. For 2 days, I tried convincing myself to move on, buy a different computer somewhere else, forget the whole thing. But every time I replayed the afternoon in my head, one sentence echoed louder than the rest. "We don't serve your kind." The words weren't shouted. They'd been delivered almost casually, as though she genuinely believed they were acceptable. Finally, I decided I at least deserved an explanation. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't planning some dramatic confrontation. I simply wanted to file a formal complaint with corporate, clear my name, and hopefully prevent someone else from being treated the same way. Monday afternoon, I drove back. The same automatic door slid open. The same promotional banners hung from the ceiling. Different customers, same manager. Melissa noticed me almost immediately. She didn't look surprised. If anything, she looked amused, like she'd expected I'd come back. She walked over before I reached the customer service counter. "You again?" she said with a thin smile. "I'm here to file a complaint." "No, you're here to cause another problem." I'd simply like the corporate contact information. She leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough that only I could hear. People like you always think the uniform gives you special treatment. I stared at her, honestly wondering whether I was hearing this correctly. I'm asking for a phone number. And I'm telling you to leave, or what? The smile returned. Or I'll have you arrested this time. A cashier standing nearby froze. Another employee looked down at the floor, pretending to organize shopping bags while obviously listening. I took one slow breath. Melissa, are you refusing to let me submit a customer complaint? On refusing service. Again. Then she added the sentence that changed everything. Veterans walk in here acting like they own the place. For just a split second, I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because of the strange irony hidden inside those words. She thought she was being sarcastic. She had absolutely no idea how close she'd accidentally come to the truth. I didn't answer. I simply nodded once, turned around, and walked out. She called after me, loud enough for half the store to hear. Don't bother coming back. Outside, I sat inside my truck without starting the engine. Most people kept emergency supplies behind their rear seat. I kept old legal files. Years earlier, I'd invested in several struggling regional businesses through a private investment company my father and I had formed after he retired from commercial banking. We rarely discussed those investments because they were designed to stay invisible. Passive ownership, no publicity, no interference unless absolutely necessary. I unlocked the metal document case, flipped through neatly labeled folders, and stopped when I found one marked Meridian Retail Holdings. Beneath the operating agreement sat another envelope containing shareholder certificates, voting authorizations, board resolutions, and one document I'd almost forgotten existed. 36.8% ownership. My ownership. Hidden through an investment LLC whose name appeared nowhere near mine in public advertisements. I leaned back in my seat and laughed quietly for the second time in 3 days. Except this laugh sounded completely different. Melissa believed she'd thrown out an ordinary customer. In reality, she'd humiliated one of the largest individual shareholders in the company that signed her paycheck. I wasn't excited. I wasn't angry anymore either. Mostly, I felt disappointed. Because, had she simply treated me with ordinary respect, none of what happened next would have been necessary. I picked up my phone and scrolled until I found a number I hadn't called in almost 18 months. Rebecca, I said when she answered. It's Ethan. My corporate attorney recognized my voice immediately. This doesn't sound like a social call. No, I replied quietly. I think one of our investments has a management problem, and I finally have a reason to get involved. There was a brief silence before she answered with the calm confidence I'd hired her for years ago. Meet me at my office in an hour. Bring every document you have. I looked back through the windshield toward the store entrance where Melissa was laughing with another supervisor, completely unaware that the worst day of her professional career had already begun. She just hadn't received the invitation yet. 47 days after that moment outside Novacore Electronics, I walked through those same front doors again, but this time everything felt completely different. The same glass entrance, the same rows of computers glowing under the bright store lights, the same customers walking between the shelves. But the feeling in the room had changed. The last time I stood there, people looked at me like I was someone who didn't belong. This time, employees looked at me with respect. A new store manager named Ethan Blake walked over, smiled, and said, "Mr. Mercer, it's an honor to finally meet you." I shook his hand and looked around for a second because I couldn't help remembering the first day. The strange thing about life is that sometimes the same place where someone tries to make you feel small becomes the exact place where the truth finally catches up with them. But standing there, I didn't feel angry anymore. I thought I would. I thought I would walk back in and feel some kind of satisfaction watching everyone know who I was. But I didn't. I just felt tired. Tired of how quickly people judge each other. Tired of how easy it is for one person with authority to damage someone's reputation. And tired of seeing how often people confuse confidence with being right. When Vanessa Caldwell told me to leave that store, she believed she had complete control of the situation. She thought she understood exactly who I was. To her, I was just another customer she could dismiss. She didn't see the years I spent serving in the Army. She didn't see the sacrifices behind my uniform. She didn't see the months I saved money for that laptop because I wanted one simple thing for myself, after years of putting everything else first. And she definitely didn't know that 3 years earlier, when Novacore was struggling to survive, I was one of the people who believed enough in that company to invest when almost nobody else would. Back then, Novacor wasn't the successful electronics chain people see today. Several locations were losing money. Employees were worried about layoffs, and investors were walking away. I wasn't interested in controlling the company. I wasn't trying to become the face of the business. I simply believed the company had potential. Through a private investment agreement, I invested $280,000, which gave me 35% ownership. But I kept my distance because I believe ownership came with responsibility, not entitlement. I never wanted employees to feel like they had to treat me differently because my name was on a document. In fact, that was the reason I stayed anonymous. I wanted to see how the company operated when nobody knew I was watching. And unfortunately, what I saw that day was a reminder that a company can have great products, beautiful stores, and talented employees, but one person in power can change the entire experience for everyone. The investigation took 47 days, and those days weren't easy. I spent hours reviewing reports, meeting with attorneys, listening to employees describe what had been happening inside the store, and trying to understand how things had reached that point. The evidence told the story clearly. Security footage showed I never raised my voice. I never threatened anyone. I never acted aggressively. The police report Vanessa filed contained claims that didn't match what actually happened. Several employees admitted they had felt pressured to follow her decisions because she'd created a workplace where questioning her authority was considered a problem. The final board meeting was one of the quietest rooms I had ever been in. Nobody was yelling. Nobody was trying to make excuses. Vanessa sat across the table, no longer the confident manager who had ordered me out weeks earlier. For the first time, she had to answer questions instead of giving orders. The board voted to remove her from her position for cause, and the company later reached a settlement regarding the damage caused by her actions. But the moment that stayed with me wasn't her losing her job. It was something much smaller. A few days after everything ended, I returned to the store one more time, picked up the laptop I originally came there to buy, and walked toward the exit. Ethan, the new manager, thanked me for giving the company another chance. I looked around and said, I never wanted this company to be about me. I just wanted it to remember what it was supposed to be. Because that was the real lesson I took from everything. You don't prove your worth by making someone else feel powerless. You prove it by staying calm when people expect you to explode. You prove it by letting facts speak louder than anger. So now I want to hear what you think. If you were in my position, would you have revealed your ownership immediately? Or would you have waited and let the truth come out through the proper channels? Do you think Vanessa crossed a line that could never be forgiven? Or do you believe people deserve a chance to change after making a serious mistake? Leave your thoughts below, because stories like this always raise a bigger question. When someone judges you without knowing your story, should justice be about revenge? Or should it be about making sure the truth finally gets heard?